Welcome to Quiet Scare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers. Authentic documented experiences, thoughtfully adapted for calm, sleep-friendly listening, truth preserved, atmosphere enhanced. Like and subscribe, and tap the bell for new releases. No more than 3 ads in the first 15 minutes, then it plays clean. Literary horror narration for sophisticated listeners. Sleep well and dream dark. I hadn't even turned off the ignition when I saw the upstairs hallway light flick on. The house was dark when I pulled in, just after 7 p.m., already deep into dusk. Orange leaves skittered across the driveway as the wind picked up, and the air had that brittle autumn bite that makes everything sound sharper. I was there to check on the Winters property. The owners were out of state, something about extended family in Maine, and they'd asked me to make sure the place stayed clean and unbroken for a few weeks. Water the plants, take the mail in, that sort of thing. Easy enough. I'd looked after a few homes before. But something about this one, I don't know. The trees stood too still when the wind died. The shutters didn't quite hang right. But that light, I sat there in the truck for a solid minute, just watching it glow through the upstairs curtain. There was no car in the driveway besides mine. No signs of entry. I was alone, or I should have been. I told myself the timer must have kicked it on. Some people had those, automated lights for security. Still, I locked the truck, walked up the path, and let myself in. The moment I stepped into the entryway, I noticed the smell. Not rot, not mildew, more like the dusty breath of a room that hasn't been touched in years, even though I'd been in there just 3 days earlier. The air had weight to it. Everything was where I'd left it. Mail on the side table, plastic still on the furniture in the living room. But the silence was wrong. Not peaceful. Too dense, like the house itself was holding its breath. I went up the stairs slowly, the tread groaning under my boots. When I reached the top, the hallway light clicked off. Not flickered, clicked. Like someone had flipped the switch right as I arrived. I stood frozen, staring at that blank ceiling bulb, listening, nothing. I waited, barely breathing, and then stepped forward, hand on the wall for balance. The bathroom door was cracked open, a sliver of black inside. I pushed it gently with my foot. The faucet was running, a slow, steady stream into the bowl. The knob was turned all the way on, but I hadn't touched it since my last visit. I twisted it shut, trying to ignore the hairs standing up on my neck. Maybe a pressure surge in the line. Maybe something mechanical. The house was old. Downstairs, I checked the locks. All intact. The back door was shut tight. I made sure the windows were still latched. Even the small one above the kitchen sink. Nothing to find. But the feeling didn't go. 2 nights later, it was the doors. I arrived just before nightfall again. The sky was gunmetal gray, and the wind was tossing leaves in circles across the street. I parked, got out, and walked the perimeter before going in. Nothing broken, nothing moved, but as soon as I stepped inside, I heard it. A door upstairs creaked shut, not slammed, just a slow, steady pull until it clicked. I stood in the foyer, staring up the staircase, not moving. I didn't go up that time. I left, told myself I'd come back during the day, and I did. Noon the next afternoon. Bright sun overhead, bird song, the works. I walked through the whole house top to bottom. Everything was where it belonged. But on the night of the 5th visit, I wasn't alone. There was an old woman who lived across the street, Miss Grant. She was out tending to her porch plants when I pulled in, and she waved me over. I hesitated, then crossed. She asked if I'd been the one turning the lights on and off at night. I said no, not intentionally. Then she asked if I'd heard anything unusual. That's when she told me. And the woman who had lived in the Winters house before them, Margaret or Maggie, she said, had passed away about 6 months prior. Heart failure. She'd lived there for 30 years. Liked things a certain way. Hated the dark. Couldn't stand dripping faucets. Doors had to be shut. Lived alone and kept to herself, but always kept the place pristine. Mrs. Grant looked me in the eye and said, "She's still particular." I tried to laugh it off, but I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying that hallway light, the faucet, the quiet, deliberate click of a door closing. The next morning, I called the Winters family. They didn't sound surprised. The husband, a man named Peter, just said, "Yeah, we've noticed that too." I asked him if he'd ever seen anyone. He said no. Said it was like the house just kept certain habits. Lights turning on after dusk. The water in the bathroom sometimes running when no one had used it. Doors being closed that had been left open. But nothing harmful. Nothing angry. He said they'd tried to keep things the way Maggie liked them, just in case. Then he told me something I still think about. She just doesn't like things to be out of order. After that, I started doing things a little differently. I always turned the hallway light on before sundown. I made sure the faucets were off, tight, closed every door behind me as I moved through the house. No music, no noise, just quiet respect, and in return the house stayed still. No more footsteps, no more lights flicking on or off. The air even felt lighter, like I wasn't intruding anymore, just sharing space. Still, I never stayed long after dark. The feeling would return, a kind of pressure behind the walls, and I'd take the hint, finish up and leave. Some nights I'd glance back as I walked to my truck, just to see if the curtain moved. It never did, but the hallway light was always on, just like she wanted it. The snow was starting to crust over in the late afternoon light, wind kicking up hard ridges along the slope. I'd been doing a maintenance sweep on the west edge of the Blue Hollow Trail, just me and my snowmobile checking boundary markers and making sure nobody had ducked the ropes. I didn't expect to find anything. This side rarely saw much traffic, especially midweek, but then I saw something that made me ease off the throttle. A shape, off to the side where the terrain dipped into a shallow ravine. At first I thought it was a discarded jacket or gear, half buried by the last snowfall. But as I drew closer, the shape resolved into something far worse. A pair of ski boots stuck out from the snowbank at a wrong angle. The legs were twisted, one higher than the other. One boot had a broken buckle. Snow was packed tight against the back of the knees, up along the thighs. The torso was buried at a slope, and I could just barely see one gloved hand. Fingers splayed, frozen into a claw. I dropped off the sled and ran the last 20 feet. I yelled once, loud enough to startle the crows out of a nearby pine. No answer. I started digging with both hands, clawing away ice crust and powder. The snow was dense, layered from the wind and a recent melt freeze. I cleared around the face, male, mid-20s maybe, pale lips drawn back just enough to show teeth. His goggles were askew and there was blood crusted inside the lens, where his nose must have smashed it during the fall. I checked for breath. Nothing. Checked his neck cold, stiff. I stopped there. No pulse, and from the way his body had stiffened, it had been hours. Radioed it in. Dispatch connected me to ski patrol. I gave them coordinates. They told me to stay put, not to move the body, and wait for recovery. Standard protocol. I knew the drill, but standing there knees soaked from kneeling in the snow, I couldn't stop staring at the angles of his limbs. They were wrong, not broken, just locked into a position you'd never assume willingly. One arm was pinned behind him, trapped between his back and the wall of snow. The other, outstretched, was buried up to the elbow, fingers frozen where they'd scraped downward into the drift. He'd been trying to dig himself out. That much was clear. His glove was worn nearly through at the fingertips. There were scrape marks in the snow wall, shallow and desperate. The trail above had a sharp dogleg turn, flanked by loose trees and an unmarked drop-off. No signs, no barriers. It wasn't meant to be skiable, but if you lost control or missed the edge, you could go right over. That's what must have happened. A small miscalculation, maybe a binding failure or just one bad edge, and he'd gone over the lip and dropped into the ravine. Problem was, the way he landed head downhill, legs uphill, meant his pack and skis acted like a brace, jamming him in place. The snow around him hardened overnight. He couldn't sit up, Couldn't roll, just stuck there, angled down, face to the snowpack. The worst part was thinking about how long he'd lasted. Judging by the marks and the discoloration, it hadn't been instant. He'd been conscious for a while, maybe long enough to hear skiers on the ridge above, maybe even yelling for help. But down in that dip with the snow walls absorbing sound, it wouldn't have carried far. Patrol arrived about 20 minutes later, a 2-man sled team. They brought the stretcher and warming blankets. Not that it mattered. One of them was new, kept glancing at the body like he hadn't seen death up close before. The other just nodded to me. Didn't ask for a rundown. He'd seen enough to know what this was. We got him loaded, tag secured, face covered. They started hauling him out. I stayed back, packing up the scene. There was a shattered ski pole half buried near the point of impact. I pulled it out and set it beside the trail flag. His other ski was still attached to his boot, the binding jammed with ice. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept picturing the outstretched hand, clawing at the ice over and over. The position wasn't natural. It wasn't peaceful. It was caught mid-motion, locked at the moment he realized no one was coming. Later, I learned he'd checked in solo that morning. Rented gear, intermediate pass. Name was Mark, 27. His parents were already driving up by the time the coroner signed the report. I wasn't part of the handoff. They kept us separate from the families, but I passed them in the lodge later, just before I clocked out. His mom looked like she'd aged 10 years between the entrance and the front desk. They added signage to that section a few days later. Warning flags, marker poles, even a new barrier rope. A gesture mostly. It wouldn't undo what happened. Wouldn't change the fact that someone had been stuck down there, alive and panicked, waiting for help that came too late. Every time I ride past that section now, I slow down. Doesn't matter if the trail's clear or the weather's fine. I always ease up, scan the drop, and listen for anything the wind might be hiding. I remember the way the frost looked on the inside of the car windows. It had crept in like spider veins overnight, threading its way across the glass until morning light made it glitter like something delicate and alive. We were parked near a gas station off the interstate. My parents had gone inside to grab coffee and snacks for the next stretch of the drive. I was in the back seat, bundled up in my thick winter coat, knees drawn to my chest, watching the trail of my breath fade on the window. It was too cold for anyone to be outside without a reason. I noticed him because he didn't fit. There was no car he'd stepped out of. No waiting family. No parked vehicle nearby with its engine running. Just a man standing near the edge of the lot, too lightly dressed for weather like this. He had no hat, no gloves. A thin windbreaker clung to his frame, the kind that did nothing to stop the cold. His jeans were wet near the cuffs, stiff with frost. I told myself he was waiting for someone. Maybe his ride was late. Maybe he'd gone inside and stepped out for a smoke. But he didn't have a cigarette. He wasn't looking at the building. He was looking at our car. More specifically, he was looking at me. At first, I tried not to react. I shifted in my seat, repositioning myself to seem casual. I pulled the hood of my coat up over my head, hoping to make myself less visible. The windows were fogged up from the heater earlier. Maybe he couldn't really see in. I told myself that. I needed to believe it. But he started walking toward me. There was a kind of wrongness to it. Not just that he was moving directly toward our car, but the way he moved stiffly, like the cold wasn't registering, like he wasn't feeling it the way a normal person would. His arms hung too loose at his sides. His shoulders were slightly hunched, but his head was up, gaze locked. I remember the way my stomach dropped, a sick rush of adrenaline that made my hands tremble. I scanned the lot for my parents. Nothing. Just the snow crunching under his boots. Closer with every step. He came right up to the car, right to my window. I froze. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. He didn't touch the glass. Not yet. He just stood there, maybe 2 feet away, staring in. His eyes moved up and down like he was sizing me up. His mouth twitched. like he wanted to say something, but no sound came. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't nervous or confused or apologetic. It was flat, measured, like a grin you'd put on for a mirror, just to check how it looked. His lips were cracked from the cold. One corner of his mouth bled slightly when he smiled too wide. He lifted one hand slowly and waved. I didn't wave back. He kept his hand up for a few seconds, then pointed at the window. Not knocking, just pointing like he wanted me to open it. I shook my head. His smile faltered just a little, and then came back wider. His hand flattened against the glass. I flinched. It wasn't a bang, he didn't slam it, but just seeing that skin so close, pale and dry and pressed against the frosted window, made my throat close up. Then, he mouthed something. I didn't understand it the first time. He repeated it. Slow, deliberate. 5 words. Let me in the car. I slid down in my seat until I couldn't see him anymore. Just the roof of the vehicle. Just a little puff of breath rising and fading in the air above my lips. I heard him tap the glass. Once, twice, then nothing. The silence was worse. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, but must have been less than a minute. I couldn't hear footsteps. I didn't know if he was still there. My body had locked up. I didn't even realize I'd started crying until I tasted salt on my lips. Then the driver's side door opened. I screamed. It was my dad. He jerked back, half dropping his coffee, and asked what the hell was going on. My mom was right behind him, looking over his shoulder. I scrambled up and pointed at the window. He was gone, just the fading imprint of a hand on the glass. They looked around, walked the lot, checked between cars. There was no sign of him. No footprints in the snow trailing away. No wet marks where someone had stood too long. My dad asked if I was sure, if maybe I dreamed it, if maybe it was a trick of the cold. I didn't answer. I couldn't. We left fast. No snacks, no coffee, just straight back to the highway with the heat on high. My parents didn't talk much the next hour. I kept staring out the window, watching for a figure that never reappeared. But I remember the eyes. I remember the smile. I remember the way he mouthed those 5 words like they were owed to him, like he really thought I would say yes. And I remember the cold not seeming to touch him at all. It started the year I turned 7. Every few nights I would wake up drenched in sweat, the image of that house vivid behind my eyelids. It wasn't just a dream. It felt mapped out in my brain. I could draw it if I had to. The outside was always misty, pale gray skies with leafless trees behind a sagging fence. The inside was worse. Low ceilings, a long hallway with one flickering sconce, mismatched floorboards that creaked wrong, and a room at the end, always locked in the beginning. But over time, the dream let me in. Inside was a wall that didn't match the others, a painted over scene. I used to stand in the dream with my fingers hovering over that wall, never touching it, always afraid something waited behind it. Then I'd wake up. It went on for months. My parents told me it was just stress, maybe from starting a new school. I didn't fight them. I just stopped talking about it. But I never stopped dreaming it. Then, sometime in spring, they said we were going to look at a new house, something affordable outside the city, a place to grow into. We drove an hour on a warm Saturday, the windows down, my siblings half asleep in the back seat. The street was familiar the second we turned onto it. My stomach dropped before I saw the house. I didn't say anything. I kept my mouth shut even as we pulled into the driveway. It wasn't identical on the outside. No sagging fence, no leafless trees. But it was close enough. Close enough that I could feel the dream rise in me like a cold tide. The real estate agent smiled too much. She unlocked the door and waved us in. My siblings darted off to explore. My parents stayed in the foyer, talking about square footage. I wandered forward, my feet tracing steps I'd taken 100 times in sleep. The hallway was there, shorter than I remembered, but the angle of the ceiling and the curve of the floorboards were the same. I kept going. The last room on the left. The door wasn't locked when I stepped inside. I knew. There it was, the wall. Off-white paint, smoother than the others. Slightly raised trim where it shouldn't be. A rectangular patch near the baseboard that echoed through me with wrongness. I turned and walked out. No one noticed. In the car, I said I didn't like the house. My parents told me I was being difficult, that we didn't have many options. They bought it. We moved in June. The nightmare stopped. For a while. Then one night after we'd settled, I dreamed it again, but this time I was awake, lying in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold weight of that room at the end of the hall. I couldn't sleep. I got up and walked barefoot, quiet past my siblings' rooms. My fingers found the door to the room and pushed it open. It was exactly as it had been. I went to the wall and pressed my palm against the seam. Something sounded behind it. A soft, hollow knock. I ran. I stopped sleeping well after that. My appetite disappeared. My grades slipped. The school counselor asked if everything was okay at home. Eventually, my parents noticed the patch in the wall. They said it didn't match the rest of the room. My dad speculated maybe there'd been a repair job. He started talking about opening it up. Just out of curiosity, he pried off the trim first. Beneath it, there was a hairline crack in the drywall. When he tapped it, the hollow sound changed. There was a void behind that wall. The next weekend, he borrowed tools from a neighbor. I watched from the doorway as he cut away the panel. Dust puffed out in little clouds. He leaned in, flashlight in hand. There was a space back there, maybe 4 feet deep, enough to crouch in. There were old boards, torn insulation, and a small pile of objects, things I won't describe. They weren't dramatic, just wrong to be there. Quietly wrong. He didn't find any explanations. The real estate agent said she had no knowledge of renovations. County records didn't mention a remodel. We sealed it back up. I stopped sleeping in my room. I started spending most of my time outside or sitting in the hallway with my back to the wall. I couldn't make myself walk past that door at night anymore. Eventually, they let me sleep in the living room. I kept a blanket rolled up under the coffee table and used the couch as a bed. I liked the big window. It gave me a horizon to focus on. I didn't talk about the dream again. Not to anyone. But I still remembered it. Every line of that house was burned into me. I think it always had been. I don't go down that hallway anymore. The wind had been gnawing at the shutters for hours by the time I locked up the bar. Half the town had cleared out earlier that week, either for the city or deeper into the mountains, trying to get ahead of the weather. Not me. I figured I'd ride it out. Just me, a couple space heaters, and whatever liquor hadn't been drunk dry. The snow was already knee-deep, coming down hard in sweeping waves. Visibility past the main road was shot, and even the glow of the street lamp outside was more a blur than a beacon. That's when I saw him, barely a shape at first, stumbling out of the white like something pulled from the storm itself. It was Marlin, one of the old-timers. Lived up near the ridge, kept to himself mostly, but he'd stop in now and then for a bottle of cheap rye and a game of cribbage. Tonight he looked like hell. Jacket half open, face blotched with frostbite, eyes moving like he couldn't focus. He staggered toward me, muttering, not making sense. I had to half carry him inside. His hands were trembling so bad he couldn't even grip the doorframe. I got him to a chair by the heater and pulled a blanket over his shoulders. He kept glancing at the windows, muttering that they don't leave prints when it's warm and they're learning how to follow the plow. I tried asking if he'd been hurt or if someone was chasing him, but it was like talking to a radio tuned halfway between two stations. What I did catch made no sense. Stuff about wrong shadows, something watching him from inside the snowbanks, tracks that circled but never stopped. I chalked it up to exposure, maybe even a stroke. I went to call Noreen, the nurse who'd stayed behind in case anyone needed help. But when I turned around, Marlin had bolted. The front door hung open, swinging in the wind. His footprints led out into the storm, disappearing a few yards from the porch. I followed, more out of reflex than sense. The snow was coming in sideways now, slicing into my face. I called his name, but the wind shredded my voice. That's when I saw the tracks. At first I assumed they were his big heavy boots, a little drag in the left foot. But then the pattern changed. Marlin's prints ended abruptly, right in the middle of the path. No stumble, no drop, just ended. And next to them were others. Bigger, longer stride, deep precise indentations that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. No snow had filled them yet. Whatever made them had passed through just ahead of me. I crouched to get a better look, squinting against the wind. The shape was off, not like any boot or shoe. The heel was too narrow. The toe flared wide, almost like claws splayed out for grip. 5 points. Deep enough that whatever it was, it weighed more than a man. I backed away fast, heart hammering in my chest. I told myself it was some kind of animal. Maybe a bear, maybe a moose, something with a gait thrown off by the snow. But deep down I knew better. I've seen bear tracks. These weren't right. They were deliberate, like something walking upright but not human. I followed the prints only long enough to realize they curved back. They didn't lead toward the ridge or the woods. They circled. The pattern was deliberate. One wide arc around the bar, like it was checking the place, watching it. I turned and ran. My truck was half buried, but it started on the second try. The snow was already crusting over the windshield. I didn't even wait for it to clear. I reversed blind until I hit the plow route, then floored it toward the clinic. The tire slipped and skidded, engine growling like it was protesting every foot forward. When I reached the clinic, Noreen was already outside. Said she'd heard something pounding on the side wall. Not 5 minutes before I called. Thought it was a bear, until she saw the marks, deep gouges in the siding. Too high for any animal she knew. We hunkered down the rest of the night in the supply room, listening to the wind. Marlin never came back. The next morning, after the storm calmed enough for the rescue chopper to land, they found his coat 50 yards from the edge of town. No blood, no body, just a coat, and around it, in a wide circle, those same deep prints in the snow, perfectly preserved, untouched by drift or wind, as if the thing that made them wanted us to see. It started small, just little things I could write off. A hoodie I couldn't find, notes missing from my desk, my favorite pen vanishing from my backpack. I chalked it up to stress, the typical mess of student life during midterms. I lived in a shared dorm at the edge of campus, a squat brick building that always smelled faintly of mildew and ramen. My roommate Zach was quiet, clean-cut, polite, always ready with a half smile that never quite touched his eyes. I didn't know him well, but he kept to himself, and I figured that was enough. The first time I felt something was truly off was during a Thursday morning lecture. I arrived late, half asleep and sweaty from rushing across campus. As I slid into a back seat, I heard laughter from a cluster of students up front. One of them turned to glance at me, then did a double take. Her smile faltered. "You were just," she started, then stopped, eyes flicking toward the door. I didn't think much of it until later that week, when a TA emailed me asking if I'd meant to turn in the same paper twice. I hadn't. When I checked the submission log, it showed a duplicate file. Same timestamp, same content, same formatting, but under my name and student ID. That kind of thing wasn't supposed to be possible. When I brought it up with Zach in passing, he acted surprised. Maybe too surprised. He suggested it was a glitch. "Tech's been weird this week," he said, shrugging. His eyes didn't leave my screen as I scrolled through the records. I noticed then that he had the same brand of earbuds I used. Same case, same scratch on the hinge. I wondered if we just bought them at the same time. It escalated after that. I found an Instagram account using my photos. Not just public ones. These were shots from my camera roll. Pictures I'd never posted. One was of me asleep in bed, face half buried in the pillow. My heart sank. I deleted the app and reinstalled it, thinking maybe I'd been hacked. When I looked again, the account was gone. Zach started wearing clothes that looked like mine. Not similar. Identical. Same hoodie, same frayed backpack with the patch on the side. One night, I saw him walking back from the dining hall, and for a split second I thought I was looking into a mirror. His walk matched mine, even the way he carried his shoulders, a bit hunched from too many hours hunched over a laptop. I don't know how long I stood there staring before he noticed me. "Hey," he said, with that same not-quite smile. "You good?" I nodded and turned away, my skin crawling. The final straw came during finals week. I was packing up to head home when I realized my wallet was missing. I tore the room apart looking for it. I even checked the trash, convinced I was losing my mind. Then, while Zach was in the shower, I opened his closet looking for extra hangers. The wallet was on the top shelf, half hidden behind a shoebox. My ID was still inside. I didn't confront him directly. I took photos, sent them to the housing coordinator, and waited. Campus security showed up the next day. Zach didn't resist. He didn't say a word as they asked him to pack up and leave. He didn't even look at me. After he left, I found more of my things buried in his drawers, my old textbooks, a pair of headphones I thought I'd lost last semester, a thumb drive with private journal entries. The weirdest part? He had a notebook full of handwriting that mimicked mine. Lists, journal entries, even doodles I recognized as my own. Like he'd been practicing. No one ever explained how far it went. The university sent out a short notice about a privacy breach and a housing reassignment. I got a new roommate, someone loud, messy, and blessedly normal. But sometimes I still catch myself wondering, how many conversations did he have pretending to be me? How many people saw him first and thought I was the copy? How close did I come to being erased, piece by piece, without even noticing? I don't take shared housing anymore. I lock everything, even my notebooks. And I keep a photo of myself taped inside my drawer just in case I ever need to prove I'm still the original. It started with the cold. That kind of cold that sinks into your fingertips and lingers behind your eyes, like it's burrowing for something deeper. I'd locked myself out of the apartment, mine for a little while anyway. On one of the coldest nights of early December, no coat, no wallet. I couldn't reach my landlord, and standing out there much longer felt like a dare with frostbite. So I called the only number I knew would answer, Rachel, my mom's cousin. She lived across town in a low-rise off 39th, the kind of building where the elevator groaned like it hated working nights. She didn't sound thrilled to hear from me, but she said I could come by, just for the night. When I got there, the hallway lights were flickering. Rachel opened the door in sweats and didn't look like she'd slept in days. There was a man inside. He introduced himself as Vince. Heavy boots, dark flannel, eyes that didn't blink enough. He wasn't from around here, that much I could tell. Rachel didn't explain who he was, and I didn't ask. She showed me the couch and tossed over a scratchy blanket. That was supposed to be it. One night. Just until I could get back into my place. But I never made it back. The next morning, Rachel was gone. No note, no text returned. Vince was still there, eating cold cereal like it was his kitchen. When I asked where she'd gone, he just shrugged and told me to relax. "She's got a lot on her plate," he said, motioning to the TV, like I was supposed to just sit down and watch with him. I tried leaving, but my phone was dead, and the front door had a new lock on it. That didn't make sense. I hadn't seen anyone come in. Vince started acting like I was supposed to be there, like I'd agreed to something. He talked to me like we had some kind of understanding. I didn't know what he meant. Still don't. He kept using phrases like, "You knew what this was," and we already talked about it, but I hadn't. I hadn't talked to anyone. The food was always there, though. Bottled water, sandwiches, weird powdery soup mixes he made in the microwave. I was hungry enough to eat anything. That's when it started. He'd hand me something and stand too close. I could smell bleach on his sleeves. One night, the soup tasted bitter, and my stomach burned after. I asked what was in it. He just laughed and said it would help me adjust. After that, things got hazy. I slept a lot, too much. Days blurred. I'd wake up and the light through the blinds would already be gone. He never left. I don't know how he paid for things. The power stayed on. Groceries came, but no one ever knocked. The building felt empty, like we were the only ones left. Sometimes he talked like we were partners. Other times he said things that made no sense, like I owed him, like I'd come to him broken and he was fixing me. He started keeping the bedroom door locked at night. Not his bedroom, mine. He moved me in there, said it was for my own good. I tried leaving again, made it as far as the stairwell before he caught me. No punches, just grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise, and stared until I looked away. He said something about consequences. That's when I realized I wasn't allowed to go. He didn't call it kidnapping, he never raised his voice, but every hour I stayed, it got harder to think clearly. The food kept changing, pills sometimes, liquids. Everything tasted metallic. My body felt slow, like my limbs had to fight the air just to move. Eventually, he said we had to leave. Too much heat, he said. I didn't know what that meant. He wrapped me in an old army jacket and led me to a car that wasn't his. We drove for hours, out of the city into the countryside. No lights out there. Just woods and long empty roads lined with skeletal trees. He brought me to a house I didn't recognize. It was falling apart, peeling paint, holes in the walls, broken furniture pushed against windows. The place smelled like rotten gasoline. There were other people too. Strangers. None of them looked at me. He didn't say much that night, just gave me another drink and told me to sleep. But I couldn't. Not with the sounds in the house. Footsteps, thuds, low voices arguing behind closed doors. In the morning. He wasn't alone. A man I'd never seen before came in, face all bone and teeth. They talked like I wasn't there. Then the stranger pulled a pistol from his coat and laid it on the table. Too much heat, Vince said again. But quieter this time. I stayed completely still. The air felt like it could cut. I could tell they were arguing about something that had nothing to do with me, but I was still part of it. Collateral. One wrong word and I'd be the message. Later, I heard them talking about a deal gone bad. Drugs maybe. Money owed. Vince had done something that meant we were being hunted now. The stranger said he'd clean up if it got worse. I knew what that meant. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited until the house was quiet, then crawled out a broken window in the bathroom. It sliced my arm open, but I didn't care. I ran through woods I didn't know, over fences, and through brush that clawed at my legs like hands. I didn't stop until I saw a road. I got picked up by a snowplow driver sometime before dawn. He didn't ask too many questions, just looked at me once in the mirror and turned the heat up. I never found out what happened to Vince, or Rachel, or that house. I'm not back to normal. I don't think I ever will be. I still get dizzy when I smell bleach. Still flinch when someone hands me a drink I didn't make myself. I don't sleep much. And when I do, I wake up freezing. The first slip didn't seem strange at first. I was coming off a long, curved bend of Route 9, just as the last bit of light faded behind the tree line. My tires jerked a little sideways. It had snowed earlier that day, a light dusting, but the roads had been dry and salted for hours. Still, winter in upstate New York had its moods, so I eased off the gas and kept my hand steady on the wheel. But then I felt it again, this time sharper. My back tires swung slightly as if the whole lane had turned to glass. I looked around and realized there were no other tire tracks in either direction. No salt lines, just a smooth, dark shimmer across my side of the road like it had been freshly iced. The rest of the pavement looked dry. That's when the headlights blinked on. Not mine. Another vehicle tucked into the trees just off the shoulder. It was angled away from the road, partially obscured by brush. Not a truck or a sedan. Something older, boxier. No engine running. No lights before that moment. I instinctively eased my car forward, tires still slipping as if the whole curve had been greased. That's the only word I can use. greased, like someone had hosed it down and let it freeze. I had to fight the steering just to keep from fishtailing into the ditch. Then I saw them. 2 figures stepped out from the woods near the vehicle. Big guys. One taller than me by at least a head. The second was broader, slow-moving. Both wore heavy coats, but not winter coats. Work jackets like what you'd see on a job site. One of them, the taller one, had something in his hand. I couldn't make it out right away. The other one walked with purpose. Head low, arms hanging just a little too stiffly. They weren't rushing, but they weren't wasting time either. They were moving with a kind of practiced rhythm, like they'd done this before. I didn't stop. I tapped the gas gently, trying to keep control, but the back end kicked again. I had maybe 20 feet between me and the part of the road that looked normal, and that's when I realized if I slowed down or spun out here, I'd be stuck exactly where they wanted me. The guy with the object in his hand shifted it. It caught the faint red glow of my taillights. It wasn't a flashlight or a bat. It was something heavier, industrial, like a sledgehammer or one of those post drivers they use for fencing. It hung low in his grip, like he didn't need to lift it yet. That was enough. I didn't think. I hit the gas harder, let the tires spin for a second, and felt the car lurch forward. I heard the engine whine and the tires screech lightly against the ice or whatever it was beneath me. I didn't look back. I felt the back tires catch traction just as I cleared the slick patch. My car straightened out, and I shot forward onto normal pavement. A glance in the mirror showed both men in motion now, faster than before, crossing the road behind me. No waving, no shouting, just that same dead-ahead posture like they were walking up to a job site. I didn't stop until I hit the next town. Pulled into a gas station and sat there for 10 minutes, breathing heavy, watching the side mirror like they might have followed. I called my brother first, then the sheriff's department. They went out there that night. Didn't find the men, but they found the patch of road. Said it looked like someone had poured water straight from a drum. Not runoff. Deliberate. They found tracks too. Boot prints, tire treads leading just barely into the woods before vanishing. The vehicle was gone. I gave my statement. They didn't say much back. Just nodded and took notes. Said I was lucky. Said whoever they were, they knew how to pick a spot where no one would hear anything. That stretch of road still has a slight shimmer when the sun hits it just right. I haven't driven it since. I take the long way now, through the hills and out past the lake, even if it adds 30 minutes. My family thinks I'm being paranoid, but I know better. I know what I saw, what almost happened. The noise started just after midnight. At first I thought it was the radiator acting up again. It had a way of knocking and whistling when the heat kicked in, especially during cold snaps. But this wasn't the usual sputter of old pipes. It was rhythmic, mechanical, like something winding, pausing, then starting again. A stuttered hum. Not quite loud, but constant enough that I couldn't ignore it. I was already lying awake, buried under 2 blankets and a quilt in my ground floor apartment. The storm outside had covered everything in thick snow earlier that evening. I'd watched it from the tiny living room window, the streetlight casting soft gold over the flurries piling against the glass. My place was part of an old converted house. 4 units, thin walls, single-pane windows that didn't keep the cold out. The landlord swore it was quaint. I called it drafty. That sound, it kept going. A few seconds of silence. Then it kicked in again, like a tool trying to work through something tough. I got up, slid my feet into the fleece-lined slippers I kept by the bed, and moved toward the front of the apartment. I didn't turn on any lights, just pressed my face to the narrow slit between the curtain and the window pane. Nothing. The porch light, which was motion-triggered, stayed dark. Snow coated the railing and the sidewalk, untouched. But the noise was still going, and I realized it wasn't inside. It was outside, just beyond the front wall. My heart thudded in a different way when I realized it was too consistent to be natural. It wasn't wind. It wasn't pipes. It sounded like someone working, like a small motor, or a winch. Something being cranked manually, maybe slowed by the cold. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed the flashlight I kept in the drawer, and stepped out the back way. My boots crunched over untouched snow behind the house as I circled to the front, making sure to keep the flashlight beam low. The cold stung my cheeks immediately, and I could feel the wind cutting through the seams in my coat. As I rounded the corner, the sound stopped. Just gone. No fade out, no slowing. Like whoever or whatever was making it knew I was there. I swept the beam across the porch. The front door was closed, the mailbox untouched. I checked the window frame. Locked. The curtains still drawn tight. Nothing looked disturbed. But then I looked down. Snow. Thick and fresh, no melt, and tracks. 2 sets of them angled across the sidewalk and looping back toward the side of the building. They were narrow, deliberate, not boots. Something wheeled, maybe. A tool cart, a hand truck. I followed them as far as I could before they disappeared into the street, where the snow had turned slushy from passing cars. When I turned back, I saw my own tracks overlapping theirs, but not fully. Whatever had been here came first. I didn't sleep. I locked the front and back doors, dragged the dresser in front of the main entry, and moved into the small interior room I used as a study. No windows in there, just drywall and 2 doors. I brought my blankets, my phone, and sat on the floor with my back to the wall until the light outside turned gray. In the morning, I opened the front door again. Snow had fallen on and off overnight, but the tracks were still faintly visible beneath a thin crust. I turned on the porch light. That's when I noticed the damage. The door frame just above the knob was splintered, not broken through, but chipped and dented. I ran my fingers over it and felt where the paint had been scraped away in a pattern, like metal had pressed into it at an angle. The latch was fine, but only just. Something had been shoved against the door. Something mechanical, like a jack maybe, or a pry bar rigged to a motor. I called the landlord. He came by an hour later with coffee and excuses. Said it was probably just someone mistaking the address in the storm. Said nothing was taken. Said I was lucky nothing broke. Said a lot of things. He promised to check the cameras. I already knew the answer to that. Just dummy boxes under the eaves. Installed for deterrence. The noise never came back. No one ever tried the door again. But for the rest of the semester, I stayed in the study at night. Slept with my boots on, kept the flashlight and my phone within reach. Every time the radiator kicked in, I listened harder, waiting for that other sound, the one that stopped when I got too close. It started with something subtle, just a flicker in my peripheral vision, as I moved down the canned goods aisle. A man, maybe mid-30s, stood at the far end. His body turned as if studying the labels on a row of beans, but his eyes were locked onto me. I didn't think much of it at first. People glance, people look, but when I turned again down the next aisle toward the dairy, he was already there, standing at the opposite end, not shopping, waiting. I felt my chest tighten, and I did the thing you do in public when you're not sure. I slowed, scanned a few cartons of milk, and peeked back. Still there, still not moving. I left that aisle. I met my sister near the bakery, under the humming lights that always made the bread look stale. Her eyes caught mine before I could speak. She'd seen him too. We didn't say a word, just a nod. Slow, deliberate, and that was enough. Our rhythm shifted. We'd trained for this in a way. Not here, not in this kind of place, but it was the same principle. You never expect it'll matter until it does. We continued shopping, or the appearance of it. One basket, no cart, hands free. I moved toward frozen foods while she headed for household supplies. The idea was to break line of sight, confirm if the man followed one of us. He didn't follow. He multiplied. 3 new faces appeared near the front registers, all male, all watching. One leaned on a magazine rack like he was reading, but his eyes didn't move. Another stood by the floral display, pretending to scroll through his phone. The third paced too slow for aimlessness, glancing at the exit, then toward us, then back again, I regrouped with my sister near the pharmacy, the linoleum floor, cold through the thin soles of my shoes. The rain had followed us in, dripped off our jackets, puddled around our footprints. Her breath showed faint in the air. The building ran cold in weather like this. We stood shoulder to shoulder, backs to a shelving unit, hands resting casually at our sides. She mouthed one word without sound, ready. I didn't nod, just met her eyes. We'd learned, from long drives and colder nights, that stillness was the better answer. We made our way to the self-checkout. Our pace didn't change, but every step held tension. My sister scanned the few items, protein bars, water, canned soup, while I faced outward, body slightly turned to keep one eye on the exit and another on the floral guy. He didn't move. Then came the moment. As she bagged the last item, two of the men shifted, not toward us, but toward each other. Slow convergence near the main exit, forming a loose line. Not blocking, not overt, but unmistakably coordinated. I stepped forward, reached into my coat pocket, not for anything threatening, just the keys. I let them dangle, loose and visible. The weight of the metal caught the light, a signal. She moved first. I followed tight behind. The exit sat beyond them, beyond whatever test they were giving us. As we walked, I locked eyes with the man from the dairy aisle. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, but he didn't move either. When we passed through the doors, the cold rain hit hard. No one followed. We walked briskly to the car. No run, no panic, just precision. I unlocked the passenger door, and she slid in fast. I circled to the driver's side, opened it, tossed the bag into the back seat. One motion, smooth. Engine on. Lights cut through the rain. The rearview mirror showed only wet asphalt and fluorescent spill from the store's overhang. I drove us out, slow until the lot emptied behind us, then faster as we merged onto the road. No headlights tailed us. We didn't speak for miles. It wasn't the first time we'd had to leave somewhere fast, but it was the first time we hadn't known why. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the men, not their silence, but the fact that they hadn't needed to say a word to change the air around us completely. The first time I noticed him, it was because of my jacket. A light denim thing with a red embroidered snake coiled along the back. Faded just enough to catch the eye but not scream for attention. My friend Carla had teased me about it while we browsed clearance racks near the food court. She called it my bad omen coat. I laughed it off. We were at the Midtown Galleria, a glassy urban sprawl of shops and kiosks. Sometime late afternoon, the kind of winter day where the light turns silver early. I had stepped away to check out a pop-up accessory stall, flipping through claw clips, when I felt someone standing a little too close behind me. Not brushing distance, but close enough I felt boxed in. "You've got good taste," a male voice said. "That snake, is that custom?" I turned. He was maybe mid-30s, dressed neatly but too neutral, like he'd been photoshopped into his outfit. Brown jacket, plain jeans, clean shoes. His eyes locked on mine like he was waiting for a test answer. I gave a polite nod, muttered something like thanks, and turned back toward the rack. He didn't leave. He asked if I designed clothes, if I worked in fashion, if I lived nearby. His tone was curious, but there was a pressure behind it. He smiled too often, too fast, like he was trying to pin something in place. Carla must have seen something in my posture, because she looped back fast, draping an arm across my shoulder like we were mid-conversation. "We're late for her sister," she told him, voice chipper and firm. He nodded slowly, eyes still on me. "Nice meeting you," he said, but it felt like a placeholder, like he wasn't done. We didn't talk about him much after, just that jacket guy, filed away under weird mall moments. I didn't even think of him again until 3 weeks later. It was a Saturday, pushing early evening, cold enough that the train platforms were wrapped in that gray hush you get before a snow. I had been out alone, errands, post office, a thrift run, nothing special. The train was late. I sat on one of the metal benches, scrolling through texts. When I looked up, he was standing maybe 20 feet away, same build, same neutral clothes, same expression. He wasn't looking around or checking his phone, just watching, not staring, exactly, like he was mid-thought and I had interrupted it by existing. I didn't react. I kept my eyes down. Every instinct said, don't engage. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe I was wrong. The train arrived. I got on fast and moved to the far side of the car. It wasn't crowded, just scattered people and muffled headphones. I thought I'd lost him, until the doors hissed shut and he entered from the opposite end. He sat directly across from me. No hesitation. No scanning for a seat. Just walked over and dropped into the space facing mine. Knees too close. Hands folded. Eyes locked in. I was hoping I'd see you again, he said, as if it had been scheduled. I didn't answer. I'd barely breathed. He smiled like it didn't matter. You live around here, right? He asked. I remember you said something about that when we met. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But I realized he was rewriting it to sound like we'd had a deeper exchange, as if we shared something. His voice was casual, like he was catching up with an old friend who'd once mentioned a vague plan. I took out my phone and texted Carla. He's here again, train, facing me, need help. She replied instantly. Call me now. Put me on speaker. I did. Her voice came through loud and fast, launching into an improvised emergency. Something about being locked out, needing me urgently. I mouthed sorry to the stranger and stood up. I moved to the door, gripping the pole as the train swayed. He didn't follow at first, just watched. At the next stop, I got off and stepped quickly onto the platform. Carla was already tracking me. Go to the bodega on 3rd and wait there. I'll get you in 10. I walked fast, cutting across people and red lights. Behind me, I heard the train doors open again. I didn't look back. Inside the bodega, the warmth hit like a wall. I stood by the drink fridge, pretending to browse. My reflection in the glass looked smaller than usual. Carla arrived minutes later, breathless and fuming. We left together, arms linked. When we reached the corner, I finally turned around. He was across the street, just standing there, watching us walk away. We didn't go straight home. We ducked into a bookstore, then a pharmacy, looping until we were sure he wasn't behind us. We stayed in contact the whole time, texting updates even when we were feet apart. Later, we checked security apps, transit feeds, tried to see if anyone else had mentioned a man like that online. Nothing? I stopped wearing the jacket after that. Not out of fear, at least, that's what I told myself, but because it felt marked somehow, like it had summoned something I didn't understand. I still don't know if it was coincidence. Maybe he lived near the Galleria. Maybe he took that train often. But the way he spoke, those forced connections, the way he inserted himself into the narrative, I can't explain that away. I haven't seen him since. But I've never taken that train again without scanning every window before I board. And whenever I go out, I keep Carla on speed dial, just in case there's a third time. Just in case he's still rewriting our story in his head, waiting for the next scene to start. I used to sleep on the couch when the radiators clicked too loud in my room. They always did in winter old apartment pipes. Never silent, always clanking like someone tapping out a code from inside the walls. That night was especially cold, and the living room had the thickest blankets and the best corner heater. The one near the window that hummed instead of banging. The light from the street lamp bled in around the edges of the curtain, just enough to paint the carpet in a gray haze. I remember the way the shadow of our coat rack stretched across the floor, like a crooked figure watching me sleep. It always looked taller at night. I had pulled the blanket over my head to block it out, trying to focus on the sounds I recognized, the hum of the fridge, the deep tick of the wall clock, my father coughing once from the other side of the apartment. It must have been just after midnight when I heard the door. Not a knock, not even a creak, just the soft click of the handle turning. At first I thought it was my dad going out for something. He sometimes checked the boiler late at night, but the footsteps didn't match his. These were slow, uneven, like someone was testing the floor with each step, not sure it would hold. The air changed. I don't know how else to say it. I felt it on my face, cold and wrong, before I heard the wheeze, a wet, sucking sort of breath. I sat up, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. The blanket slid to my lap, and I blinked into the dim room. The front door was shut, but there was someone standing inside, just standing, a man. He was leaning against the wall next to the coat rack, bent slightly at the waist, one hand pressed to his stomach, the other splayed on the wallpaper like he was trying to keep himself upright. His clothes were wrong, too thin for the cold, no jacket, no shoes, just mismatched sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung off him like it didn't fit. His skin looked raw in the light, reddened, shiny in spots like he'd been out in the wind for hours. His eyes were open wide, but not focused. He swayed, then muttered something I couldn't catch. I must have made a sound when I moved because his head snapped toward me so fast it made his whole body twist. He staggered one step forward, then dropped to his knees. He didn't cry out, just let out this low grunt, almost a growl, and tried to crawl toward me. I screamed. My dad was there in seconds. He came out of the hallway in a rush, barefoot in sweatpants, no shirt, hair flattened on one side. He didn't say anything, just went straight for the man and grabbed him by the arm, pulling him up and away from me. The man resisted at first, not with strength, just confusion, like he didn't understand what was happening. He kept muttering something, words strung together without meaning. Not here, not the one, it's too far, too cold, too late. My mom called the police while my dad kept the man pressed against the wall, one arm across his chest. I stayed on the couch, knees pulled up to my chin, blanket clutched in both fists. I don't remember moving. The man never tried to run, he just kept mumbling and swaying, his head lolling side to side, eyes blinking slowly like he was falling asleep, standing up. The police arrived fast, maybe 10 minutes. They took him without a fight. My dad explained that he was a neighbor, lived 2 floors down with his sister. We'd seen him before in the hallway, usually bundled up, polite, quiet, never talked much. Definitely never like this. They asked if we knew how he got in. My dad walked them over to the front door. The lock was still intact, deadbolt still engaged. No scratches, no pry marks. The latch chain was hanging loose, but not broken, just unhooked. I heard one of the officers mutter, "Doesn't make sense." They did a sweep. Nothing else out of place. All windows locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. The door hadn't been kicked or picked. It looked like someone had just opened it and walked in. They said they'd take him to the hospital for evaluation. One of them mentioned a possible breakdown, maybe medication related. But even then, they couldn't explain how he got inside. We never left the door unlocked. My parents are strict about that. Every night check the bolt, latch the chain, twist the handle twice to be sure. My mom didn't say much that night. She just kept boiling water for tea. She never drank. My dad paced the hallway, checking the locks on every door. I stayed on the couch. Couldn't bring myself to go back to my room, not with those radiators clanking and the windows creaking. The next day, my dad went downstairs to talk to the man's sister. She was shaken. Said he'd gone missing earlier that evening, sometime around 10. She'd called around, checked the usual places. No sign. He didn't have a key to our place. Never had. I asked if maybe someone had copied ours. My dad said no. We'd only ever made 3. He had 1. My mom had 1, and the spare was still in the kitchen drawer. We changed the locks that week. New bolts, new chain, even a small camera above the door. But the thing that kept eating at us wasn't what happened. It was how. Every night after that, I lay awake on the couch, watching the door, listening for the click of the handle. I never heard it again, but I kept seeing his face in the stretch of shadow near the coat rack, eyes wide, skin raw, mouth moving like he was still trying to explain something. It was a few days before Christmas. and the house smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. My parents had taken the younger one, my little sister, to visit our grandparents overnight, leaving just me and my older brother in the house. We were supposed to be mature enough to handle it. I was 17, he was 20, and we hadn't been getting along for weeks. He'd been edgy since coming back from college, tense in ways I couldn't name. We'd fought earlier that day, loud enough I worried the neighbors might hear. Something stupid, the dishwasher or how I left my shoes by the door. But underneath it there was something colder, more deliberate in his tone. Not anger. Something else. Something slower. That night, it snowed. Just a little. I watched the flurries settle against the glass while the TV ran low in the background. My phone was charging in the kitchen. He came in from the hallway, quiet for someone his size, and asked if I wanted to watch something together. That alone was weird. We hadn't sat on the same couch in a month. I nodded cautiously, kept my back to the arm of the sofa, my legs curled under me. "You can sit here," he said, patting the other end of the couch. But the way he looked at the cushion like it mattered where I sat sent a wave of something cold through my chest. I stayed where I was. I told him my leg was sore and I wanted to stretch it out. He shrugged too casually and sat down in the recliner instead. We watched half of a movie in silence. He didn't fidget. He barely blinked. At some point, I saw him glance toward the kitchen twice in under a minute. That's when I got up and pretended I was getting my charger. As I walked down the hallway past the stairs, I glanced back. He wasn't watching the TV. He was watching me. In the kitchen, I stayed quiet and listened. Heard him get up. Footsteps, deliberate, moving away from the living room. I opened the cabinet under the sink. We kept the bug spray there. I grabbed it, along with a roll of duct tape from the junk drawer, and slipped quietly back into the laundry room. It had a lock on the inside. I shut the door without a sound and slid the bolt. A few minutes passed. Then I heard him come into the kitchen. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Then nothing. I didn't move, just stood there, heart going like a trapped bird. One hand on the can, the other still gripping the duct tape like it might do anything. Eventually I heard him go upstairs. The creak of the third step from the top gave him away. I waited until the silence settled, then stayed there another 20 minutes, barely breathing. When I finally came out, the lights were still on in the kitchen. The recliner sat empty. I checked all the locks, then braced a chair under the front doorknob and pushed the coffee table against the sliding door in the back. I spent the night on the floor, lights on, back against the pantry wall. In the morning, I called my parents and made up something about not feeling great. I asked if they could come home early. They said they'd leave after lunch. My brother didn't come down that morning, or at least I didn't see him. I kept to the kitchen. When they got home, he acted normal. Too normal. He hugged my mom, helped my dad with the bags, and asked my little sister about her sleepover. That night when they were all asleep, I went to the couch where he'd told me to sit, lifted the cushion slowly. Underneath it, pressed into the dark fabric, was a kitchen knife, the largest one we own, blade wrapped in a rag barely sticking out. I didn't scream. I didn't touch it. I just replaced the cushion and walked back to my room. One step at a time, knees barely holding. The snow outside hadn't stopped, but inside everything had frozen weeks ago. It was already dark when I stepped off the bus, the streetlights casting long shadows across the slushy sidewalks. The air bit at my cheeks, typical for a winter night in the city, and I tightened the scarf around my neck, my backpack slightly heavier than usual with borrowed textbooks. I'd stayed later at the library than planned. Finals week always did that to me. I took a quick glance at my phone. Just after 8 p.m., not late by city standards, but late enough for the streets to be half empty and the air to carry every footstep. I was halfway down the block, heading for the subway entrance, when I noticed him. He was standing across the street, a tall man in a dark hoodie, pacing the sidewalk in erratic bursts. He'd walk a few steps, stop, turn around, then jerk his head in quick movements like he was scanning for something or someone. At first I thought he might be high or just cold. People act strange sometimes when the wind's biting, but then he paused mid-turn and looked directly at me. I don't mean he looked in my direction. I mean his eyes locked on mine across the road. I kept walking, steady pace, eyes forward. My building wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute walk, but the subway station was closer. I decided to head down there instead, just to be around people. Even if I didn't take the train, the presence of others felt safer. When I reached the corner, I checked over my shoulder. He was crossing the street fast, head low, hands jammed into his pockets. My gut told me to move. I turned onto the busier avenue, hoping to blend into a cluster of pedestrians waiting at a crosswalk. A woman pulled a grocery cart beside me, earbuds in, oblivious. A couple argued softly behind us, their breath fogging between them. I risked another glance. He was closer now, maybe half a block back. Same jerky gait, eyes still locked on me. I crossed the street with the group, then veered off into a side alley that connected to the back of a coffee shop I knew had a second entrance. I didn't want to go inside, not yet, but I wanted to lose line of sight. Halfway down the alley, I stopped behind a dumpster and crouched. My breath steamed in the cold, heart knocking hard against my ribs. I peered around the edge just in time to see him turn into the alley, walking slower now, purposeful. That's when I saw the blade. It wasn't a kitchen knife or anything flashy, just a thin, short blade, maybe a box cutter, but it caught the light from the nearby street lamp as he pulled it from his pocket and held it loosely at his side. I didn't wait. I bolted out the opposite end of the alley, bursting into the small lot behind the coffee shop, then cut through to the next street. A cab idled at the corner, headlights casting wide pools of safety. I waved my arms, hoping the driver saw me. He did. I rushed over, yanked open the door, and climbed in before I even thought of a destination. Just drive, I told him, anywhere crowded. The cab pulled away just as the man stepped out of the alley behind me. Too late to follow, I kept my head down, pretending to scroll through my phone, but I watched the rearview mirror. He didn't chase the cab, he didn't yell, he just stood there watching, blade still in hand, the headlights making his silhouette blur in the winter haze. I asked the driver to drop me off 3 stops later, near a well-lit grocery store. I stayed there for 20 minutes, pretending to shop, watching every reflection, every door. Eventually, I called my mom and asked her to meet me at a train stop closer to home. She didn't ask many questions, just showed up, gave me her coat, and walked me the rest of the way without saying a word. That night, I triple-locked the door. I slept with the light on, and I never took that alley again, even in daylight. But I keep thinking about how it started. Not with the knife, not with the chase. Just a glance too direct, too long, and something in my gut that knew before I did. I never told my parents where I was really going that day. They thought I was heading to Kevin's to study for our midterms. I even packed my backpack with books just to sell the lie. But Kevin had a different plan. His cousin Luke was visiting from out of town and had brought his snowmobile. And Luke, being 2 years older and full of bad ideas, knew about the frozen lake trail behind the woods, off limits especially after last year's accident. My dad had one rule every winter. Don't take the lake trail. It's not safe. But when you're 16 and trying to impress your friends, rules start to sound more like dares. By the time we got to the edge of the woods, the sky was already shifting. That weird gray haze was setting in, sunlight bleeding out like someone dimming a lamp. Still, the surface of the lake looked solid, and Luke said the trail was clear and fast. I took the snowmobile second, after Luke and Kevin tore off ahead. My heart was pounding as I gunned it, the cold air slicing my face like tiny needles. The machine roared under me, vibrating through my gloves. For a few minutes I felt invincible, skimming across the ice, weaving between patches of frozen snow, the world blurring into cold and speed. Then the fog rolled in. It came fast. swallowing the edges of the lake and thickening like smoke. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. I eased up a bit, but not too much. I didn't want the others thinking I'd chickened out. That's when I saw a shadow ahead. Then it vanished. I leaned into the curve, assuming it was Kevin or Luke. But when I came around the bend in the trail, a tight choke point between two snow-covered boulders, I saw it. A downed tree. Big. Frozen. Lying right across the path. I didn't even have time to scream. I yanked the handlebars hard, heart kicking into my throat, and then just before I braced for impact, I caught it. Someone waving. A figure just off the trail, barely visible through the mist, frantically swinging both arms. It was enough. My reflexes kicked in, and I hit the brakes and jerked to the side. The back of the snowmobile fishtailed wildly before it slammed to a stop, inches from the trunk. My breathing was ragged, fogging up my visor as I sat there shaking. When I looked back to where the person had been standing, there was no one, just whiteness and trees. It took me a minute to get moving again. I eventually found Kevin and Luke near the edge of the woods, doubled over laughing about how I disappeared into the fog. But I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Later that night, my dad was waiting when I got home. Kevin's mom had called to ask if we'd made it back safely, thinking we were just studying like good kids. I got grounded, of course, for lying, for disobeying, for taking the lake trail. But that wasn't what stayed with me. What kept me up for nights afterward was the memory of that signal, those arms waving, saving me from a head-on collision. I never figured out who it was. Luke swore no one had been behind us, and there were no footprints in the snow when I went back the next day. Maybe it was luck. Maybe someone had followed us unseen, or maybe the lake remembers. All I know is, I don't lie about where I'm going anymore, and I don't ride on thin ice. It was one of those nights where the cold doesn't bite, it clings. Every breath fogged up the visor of my helmet, and my gloves barely kept the sting out of my fingers. I'd been out on runs since just after sunset, navigating the grid of downtown streets on my electric scooter, weaving between traffic, keeping my head low, just pushing through. The streets were slick with half-melted snow, salted but still treacherous in spots. The city didn't sleep, but it sure felt like it had rolled over and turned its back. Around 11:40 p.m., I pulled up outside a kebab place on 8th and Hudson to grab an order. My headset buzzed with the next delivery details. While I waited under the overhang, breath clouding around me, I remember watching the traffic light blink red across the intersection and seeing a gray sedan parked half a block down, idling. At first I thought nothing of it, just another late-night driver, maybe waiting for someone. But it was still there when I came out 3 minutes later with the bag in hand, headlights on, engine running. I took the corner, pushed off, and headed toward the drop-off a few blocks east. The streets were mostly empty. No honks, no chatter, just the electric whir of my wheels and the steady crunch of ice under rubber. That car turned when I turned. It kept its distance, sure, but every time I glanced back, it was still there. Not speeding, not tailgating, just hovering. At the next red, I rolled up to the crosswalk and stole a longer look. Same car. Lights dimmed a bit now, like it was trying to blend into the gloom. I cut down a side street with fewer lights, hoping it would veer off. It didn't. My chest tightened. Could have been coincidence. Could have been nothing. But I felt the stare before I saw it. When I passed under a broken street lamp and heard the slight squeal of tires behind me, matching my deceleration, I sped up just a little, weaving around potholes and patches of frozen slush. The sedan kept pace. I made the drop-off without stopping, tossing the bag onto the stoop and snapping a photo for the app. Then I bolted. No waiting for a tip. No checking the next order. I headed toward the commercial strip near the parkway, toward lights and signs, and 24-hour spots. I didn't know what the driver wanted, but I didn't want to find out alone on a quiet block. The sedan closed in once I was back on main roads. It pulled into the bike lane for a second, blocking my path. just long enough to force me to hop the curb and swerve through a pedestrian island. I could feel my heart hammering as I zipped past a liquor store and cut across 2 lanes. Ignoring the honks, I saw the gas station at 10th and Meredith. Bright lights, security cameras, people inside. I made straight for it, jumped the curb again and pulled right up to the glass storefront. I stayed on the scooter, helmet on, pretending to fiddle with my phone. The car pulled up to the opposite curb facing me. We stared at each other across the street, driver's side window half down. I couldn't see much through the glare, but I caught a silhouette, a figure with one hand on the wheel, unmoving. I eased into the station and acted casual, like I was waiting for a ride. I bought a soda I didn't want, kept my eyes on the mirrors. The car was still there when I came out. That's when I made the call. Dispatch routed me through to local PD. I told them I was being followed, described the vehicle, gave them the cross streets. I stayed on the line, slowly circling the lit edge of the parking lot on my scooter, never turning my back. The car edged forward once but didn't cross. 2 cruisers rolled in under 5 minutes. The sedan peeled off the second the first siren cut through the air. 1 officer went after it. The other pulled up next to me, window down, hand raised. He asked a few questions. I answered as best I could, heart still slamming in my chest. He didn't press me, just offered to escort me to the transit hub a few blocks away. I took the offer. We rolled slow side by side until I was under the neon buzz of the terminal canopy. I locked up my scooter near the steps and sat inside, surrounded by old vending machines and flickering monitors, pretending to scroll through my phone while I waited for the first morning train out. It started with the crunch of my own boots on the trail. I was halfway between the last streetlight and the woods, that quiet zone where the town faded and the trees took over. The snow had stopped a few hours earlier, and everything looked clean, flat and untouched, except for my path winding behind me. It was about 10 p.m. I remember because I'd told my mom I'd be back by 10, but I had wanted a few more minutes to clear my head. I'd been walking this loop trail behind our property for years. It snakes through a small patch of woods, maybe half a mile total. Nothing wild, but at night, even familiar places change. The air gets heavier, and sound behaves differently, like the cold itself is listening. That night was still. Not silent, but still. The kind of quiet where you notice your breath before your thoughts. I had earbuds in, but nothing playing, just stuffed in to dull the wind. I wasn't really expecting anything, just needed to think. About halfway through the loop, I stopped. Not for any reason. My boots just paused, and I stood there in the snow, looking off into the trees. There's a clearing there, no trail, just brush and trunks and shadow, and I felt like I was waiting for something. I didn't know what. Then I heard it, and something big was moving out there. Heavy footfalls, one at a time, not fast, not slow, just deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch again. I turned off the earbuds without removing them, just held still and listened. Another step, closer this time. It was coming from the right, where the trees crowd close and the snow lies deeper, where no one walks. I called out once. Just a casual hello. Nothing brave or stupid. Just enough to hear my own voice, and hoped the sound of it would reset the world. Nothing replied. But the steps stopped too. I stood there, trying to match the sound to something I knew. Deer? No, too rhythmic. Not a person. People don't walk like that in the woods without flashlights or talking or anything. I moved again, slowly, just a few feet. My own steps felt deafening now. The snow was fresh, dry, and it gave with each press. I kept checking behind me, and every time I did, my trail was the only one I saw. I told myself it was probably runoff, or a branch shifting under snow. But branches don't walk in straight lines. The trail looped to the left up ahead, and I kept moving, trying to act normal, but the footsteps came back. Crunch, pause, crunch. They were off to the side now, matching my pace but never speeding up. I stopped again. So did they. I dropped to a crouch, one knee in the snow, and turned my phone flashlight on. I swept it toward the trees, expecting no, hoping to catch sight of a raccoon, or maybe even a coyote. Nothing. Just black trees and white snow. No movement, no eye shine, no tracks. I stood up, fast, heart hammering. That's when I noticed it. My own trail was still the only one. It snaked in behind me, clear as a line drawn in chalk. Everything else, every patch of snow off trail was undisturbed, but I had heard it stop when I stopped, heard it follow me, matching step for step. My brain tried to write it off. Echoes, maybe. Snow shifting after I passed. The cold playing tricks, but snow doesn't echo like that. It swallows sound, and these were footsteps. I turned and started walking faster. Not a run, something worse than that. That middle speed where you don't want to panic but your body's already a few seconds ahead of your mind. Crunch behind me. I froze. The noise had moved. It was closer, maybe 20 feet back, just off the trail. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just started walking again, this time with a little jog under each step. My head was hot. That's what I remember most. The air was freezing, but my scalp felt like it was burning. When I cleared the woods, the wind picked up. It always does near the edge. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I finally looked back. No one there, no tracks, just trees and snow, and that weird pressing quiet. I didn't think. I cut through the side yard and ran straight to the back door. Boots still on, snow flying off me in clumps. My mom looked up from the couch when I slammed the door. She didn't ask why I was breathing like I'd sprinted home. Didn't ask why I locked both the knob and the deadbolt. She just asked, "Did you see it?" I stared at her. "What?" She shook her head, like she'd asked something she didn't mean to. "When I was your age," she said real soft. I stopped walking that trail after dark. Didn't tell anyone why, just stopped. I didn't say anything, I couldn't. She stood, crossed to the window, and pulled the curtain all the way shut. "You hear something big," she said, "but there's never any tracks. It's been like that since before I was born." I asked her once, a few days later, what she thought it was. She didn't answer. Just told me not to go looking for something that didn't want to be seen. I haven't walked that trail at night since, and I don't plan to. It was the kind of cold that wraps around your bones and settles there. Not the sting of frostbite. Not yet, but the creeping ache that makes your limbs feel too heavy, like the air itself had weight. I remember the crunch of the snow under the treads of the snowmobile, how it echoed across the vast flat nothing of the frozen lake. We were coming back from a day trip. My dad, my older sister, and me. Just before sunset, the sky already deepening into violet behind the black trees lining the shore. The snow had kept falling all day, a steady curtain that made the horizon smear and blur. It was beautiful, in that cold, dangerous way things are when they don't care if you live or die. I sat wedged between my dad and my sister, arms pinned to my sides in the too big jacket she'd made me wear. I wasn't driving, obviously I was just along for the ride, watching the tracks we left disappear almost instantly beneath the blowing snow. The lake was big. I don't remember the name, only that it took nearly half an hour to cross even at full speed. There were flags marking the supposed safe trail, little red tags tied to branches stuck into the snowpack. My dad trusted those flags, or at least pretended to. He kept his eyes fixed forward, posture tense, jaw set in a way I now know meant he was scared but trying not to show it. It happened so fast it's hard to remember what came first, the sound or the motion. 1 second we were skimming across what looked like solid white, and the next the snowmobile jerked sideways. The front end dipped, hard. There was a crack, deep and sharp like a tree splitting in winter, and then the left ski dropped into open water. The machine didn't flip. Not right away. It tilted violently toward the whole thing hanging at a diagonal. For a split second, It just balanced there, nose down, left side sagging. I felt the pull, gravity taking over. My sister screamed, but it wasn't fear, it was urgency. She was already moving. My dad held tight to the handlebars, his weight countering the slide, the rear end of the machine still on ice. My sister swung off the back, boots slipping, and threw herself toward the downhill side. Her foot punched through a thin crust and she went to her knee, but she kept crawling. I remember her gloves gripping the edge of the seat, using the leverage to push upward. The snowmobile shifted with a low groan. Water sloshed beneath the front end. I could see blackness where the ice had given way, jagged edges rimmed with slush. The machine was going to tip forward, and we were still on it. I didn't do anything. I didn't think to. I was frozen, not from the cold, but from a kind of blank shock. Everything felt like it was happening behind a sheet of glass. My dad barked something, I think it was my name, but he didn't wait. He let go of the handlebars, spun, and hooked his arms around me. I remember his grip on my coat, how fast it all went. He flung me backward toward the rear of the sled, yelling at me to get off. My sister caught me, or slowed me down at least, and we both went sprawling onto the ice. That shift was enough. The machine rocked again, and this time the balance broke. The nose plunged, the back end rose, and it began to slip into the water, but my dad didn't follow it. He was hanging on to the side, one boot wedged against the rear rack, the other braced on what was still solid. My sister lunged. She grabbed his arm, and together they shifted the weight back, just enough for him to scramble up and away. The whole thing took maybe 20 seconds. By the time the snowmobile settled, it was half submerged, angled like a ship going down, the front end lost to the dark water. Steam rose from the engine as it hissed under the surface. The ice around the brake was cracked in a spider web, groaning under the strain. We backed away slowly, crawling at first, then walking stiff-legged toward the shore. My dad didn't speak for a long time. He kept checking the ice ahead, tapping with his foot before taking each step. My sister kept looking over her shoulder, like the lake might decide to take another shot. When we finally reached solid ground, the last of the light was gone. The snow had stopped. Everything was quiet except for our breathing and the wind moving through the trees. I didn't realize how wet I was until we stopped moving. My gloves were soaked, my knees burned. My dad wrapped his arms around us both, holding tight, and I could feel him trembling. Just a little. We never went back for the snowmobile. He told the ranger about the break, marked the location on a map. The lake would freeze over again in a few days, maybe hide the hole completely, but he said he didn't care. The machine wasn't worth the risk. We drove home in silence. I sat in the back seat, bundled in a blanket from the trunk, watching the snow fall against the windshield. Every time we hit a patch of ice, my stomach dropped. I still think about that moment. The balance, the edge, how close we came to sinking, how quick everything had to be, and how sometimes surviving doesn't feel like escape. It feels like standing still while the world cracks around you. I woke up gasping, not from a dream, but from something real, something thick and sharp in the air. The inside of my throat felt lined with grit. I sat up fast and coughed hard enough to make my eyes water. The wood stove was barely glowing. No new logs added since the fire started before bed. Yet the air felt wrong, heavier. I walked to the main room, passing the small kitchen alcove. My boots thumped softly against the plank floor. The window panes were clouded from the inside, condensation streaked by rivulets. The thermometer nailed outside, read -15 math, typical for that part of the forest that time of year. I shook my brother awake next. He'd passed out on the couch in front of the fire, wrapped in 2 quilts. His forehead was damp. I touched his cheek, clammy. "Something's wrong," I said, already moving toward the hallway. The others stirred. Mom, half asleep, asked if the power had gone out. It hadn't. The little solar rig out back was still pushing enough juice for lights. But no one felt right. Everyone was groggy, heads pounding. There was a smell in the air, not smoke exactly, but a stale, sour undertone that didn't belong. I opened the flue first, or tried to. The handle barely moved. I swore under my breath and leaned in, flashlight in one hand. The shaft looked open. I got a poker from the fireplace set and nudged upward into the chimney. It struck something hard after only a few feet. Whatever was up there wasn't soot. I backed away and opened the front door for air. The cold hit like a punch, but it cut through the haze. My lungs ached with the first clean breath. The air inside had gone dangerously bad. Everybody outside. Now, no one argued. We pulled on boots, grabbed jackets, and stepped into the brutal night. Stars glittered with painful clarity above the pines. The snow squeaked underfoot. I herded everyone toward the truck, parked under the shed roof. My mind kept going back to the flue. It was clean when we lit the fire. I'd checked it myself before starting the stove. I'd even done the chimney sweep last fall. Something was in there now, blocking it, and it hadn't just appeared. The smoke must have had nowhere to go. It had pooled into the house slowly, quietly, until it almost took us with it. Once everyone was in the truck with the heater running, I grabbed a flashlight and walked back toward the house. I circled around, checking the snow behind the cabin. Nothing. No tracks. But when I got to the base of the chimney stack, there it was. Metal tracks in the snow, right up to the vent box at the side of the house. Someone had dragged a ladder from the woodshed. The snow around the base of the chimney had been tamped down and brushed over, but not well. I climbed onto the porch roof and followed the beam to the flow cap. The metal screen was still in place, but something had been wedged beneath it. Metal wire twisted into a rough coil, stuffed with heat-resistant padding. It wasn't random. It had been shaped to fit. That was when I knew it wasn't an accident. I took pictures, gloved fingers numb. I bagged the wire and padding in a plastic freezer bag from inside the truck. Back inside the cabin, I opened every window and door, let the cold sweep through and push the rest of the poison out. No one wanted to sleep there again. We packed up fast. What we could carry fit in the truck bed. My brother kept checking the rearview mirror as we drove down the logging road, tires crunching over fresh powder. He asked who could have done it, but I didn't have a name. The property owner, a friend of my dad's, hadn't been up in months. No one should have been near the place. The forest was dense, the roads bad, and the land quiet in the off-season. Yet someone had been watching, waiting for a night we'd build a fire and stay in. They'd come with tools, gloves, time. I checked under the truck once we were safe in town. Found more of those same faint tracks near the rear bumper. Someone had followed us in. Someone knew we were there. We never went back to the cabin, not even to get the rest of our things. We told the owner what happened. He changed the locks, sold the place a few months later. I still wonder if the new buyers know what almost happened there. It started with a sound I didn't like, a short, sharp clunk that jolted through the steering wheel, followed by a flicker of the dash lights. I was already white-knuckling the drive, mid-December back roads near the base of the Appalachians, snow coming down in sheets that blurred the forest into a moving wall of gray. The heater was failing. My phone signal was dead, and the next town was a good 30 miles out, according to the rusted green sign I passed, about 20 minutes before the trouble began. The car, my '98 Civic, let out a groan, sputtered once, and then the engine cut. No warning light, just dead silence, but for the thump of the wipers and the wind. I coasted it as far as it would go, steering through the snow-covered road until it lurched to a stop half on the shoulder. No other cars, not even tire tracks, just me in a dim stretch of woods, with tree limbs heavy with snow, sagging like they were reaching down to the road. I sat there a minute, trying the ignition again. It clicked, but didn't turn. I popped the hood and stepped out, boots crunching into snow that soaked through in seconds. The cold bit into me hard. I didn't have gloves. I wasn't dressed for this kind of emergency. Under the hood, nothing looked obviously wrong, but I didn't really know what I was looking for. I was shivering hard when I saw it. A light, yellow, dim, glowing through the trees maybe 100 yards off. Looked like an old porch lamp. I hesitated. Common sense was screaming no, but standing there, breath pluming in the frozen dark, I knew I couldn't last long outside, and staying in the car wasn't much better without heat. I locked the car out of habit, then pushed into the woods, stumbling more than walking. The snow came down heavier under the canopy, clinging to the branches and blotting out the sky. The light stayed fixed, flickering faintly as I closed in. It was a house. Old, wooden, paint flaked off the siding, the roof sagging with a thick coat of snow. The porch creaked as I stepped on it. No bell. I knocked once, then again, harder. No answer. But I saw movement inside. A shadow, tall and slow, crossing in front of a window. I knocked again, voice shaking, asking for help. This time, the door opened a crack. A man stood there. Thin, gray hair, long and patchy. His eyes didn't look at me. They hovered somewhere over my shoulder. He didn't speak, just stood there, breathing loudly through his nose. I started to explain my car. The cold just needed to warm up for a minute, maybe. He didn't respond. He just opened the door wider and stepped back. Inside was warmer, but not by much. There was a fire going, low in the hearth, casting the room in a dull orange. The place smelled like mildew and something sharper, maybe gasoline. I heard the creak of another footstep upstairs. Then another figure emerged from the far doorway. A woman, maybe the same age, maybe older. Hair long, thin, wet-looking. She didn't blink, she didn't speak. She moved like she was gliding. I started to feel the wrongness then, not just awkwardness or discomfort. Wrongness. The man stood behind me too close. I could hear his breath right behind my left ear. The woman crossed the room slowly and sat in a wooden chair, never breaking eye contact. I asked again if I could just warm up for a minute. I tried to make it sound casual. She tilted her head, bird-like, then tapped her fingers against the armrest. Tap, 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 like a code. No rhythm I could place, just sharp, deliberate motions. The man moved to the fireplace and stared into it, still saying nothing, still breathing like it was work. I took a step back, said I might just go check on the car again. They didn't respond, neither moved, but I felt them watching me. Even the man whose back was to me, he was still watching me. I backed toward the door, my hand brushing the knob. That's when the woman stood up. Not fast, not slow, just suddenly vertical, her shoulders hunched up to her ears. Her hands hung too low at her sides. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't explain. I just slipped out and started running. The snow was heavier now, thicker. I could barely see, but I ran blind, hoping I was going in the right direction. Branches clawed at my jacket. My boots slipped. I fell once hard, but I didn't stop. When I burst out of the woods and saw the shape of my car, I nearly cried. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. Still no power, but I popped the hood again and checked the battery cables. One had come loose, almost all the way off. I swear I hadn't touched it. I hadn't been under there long enough to do anything. I shoved it back into place, twisted it tight, then jumped back inside and turned the key. The engine struggled, then turned over. Headlights cut through the snow. I jammed it into gear and peeled out, fishtailing once before straightening out and driving fast. Too fast for the road, but I didn't care. As I pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. There were two figures standing at the edge of the trees. They weren't chasing me. They were just standing there, still, silent, watching me go,